Welcome back to this edition of the Schaftlein Report. We got a special episode for you here today. It is actually Mark Schaftlein is here. I am hosting the Schaftlein Report, and Mark Schaftlein, the host, is going to be my guest today on his show, the Schaftlein Report. If you got all that, so I'm excited to be here, be back with Mark, and you're in for a treat here to reverse the roles here, not genders, mind you, just host and hosted. So welcome, Mark. How you doing?
Hey, Drew, I'm happy to be with you today. Thank you for hosting the show today. And folks, as many of you are aware that listened yesterday, I've been traveling. I'm taking good care of my brother who had a heart attack last week, and he's doing much better. He survived. And so I'm being the caretaker for about the next week to 10 days. And I'm really happy to be with you today, Drew. Much appreciated.
Well, it's important out there. Everyone doing this, like you hosting these shows, we all have personal lives and things going on as well. So, you got double duty. You're trying to save the country here, and you're taking care of your brother as well. So, God bless you, Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Drew. Much appreciated. Lots to talk about, though, right?
Oh yeah. I was up late last night, and my brain was just going crazy because John Solomon over at Just the News. He released a bombshell article, right? And so it blows up this whole narrative that, of course, the Biden administration didn't know anything about this raid. They were trying to give the appearance that they were uninvolved completely, that the DOJ acted on their own like some rogue agency. And well, it turns out that the Biden administration was very much aware of going on. So much so, in fact, that this grand jury and the subpoena and what developed into this raid could have been possible without direct involvement and help from the Biden White House. Do I have that right?
Yeah, I think you do. I read John's article, and it seems to me that the old phrase plausible deniability. I mean, the White House was asked about this shortly after the raid took place. And again, folks, it's a raid. It is not an action. It was a raid on his house. They tried to change the narrative. But Solomon's information is that the Biden administration was involved in this. I don't know whether it ran through Susan Rice, Ron Klain, or both of them. I'm not sure Biden's extent involved because I think that will come out. But clearly, whether it was Susan Rice, Ron Klain, who's the chief of staff, and Biden, or if it was just Susan Rice, who I wouldn't put it past her. She's a pathological liar dating back to the Iraq situation. It's crystal clear to me, Drew, that the White House was involved in this. And if they weren't calling the shots on it, which I believe they were, then something just is a foul here.
Yeah, absolutely. Because at the root of this story from John Solomon, and it's not just he made this up. He has memos from the Biden administration. And look, this is kind of like the Trump-Russia collusion thing all over again. There was a lot of pre-planning that went into getting to this point with the raid, and we can get into that in a minute here. But at the heart was a memo was sent between the Biden administration and, of course, Trump's lawyers, telling them that they were not going to honor any executive privilege. Now, this comes to here's the point. Executive privilege, I guess we should cover for a second. Yeah. This is the president's unique ability to basically put a stop to the legislative branch or the judicial branch having access to, documents that he perceives and deems to be, a danger or having some kind of, national security risk and so on and so forth. They shouldn't be seen. Barack Obama did this with Fast and Furious, right? He asserted executive privilege to prevent the oversight committee from getting those documents that they asked for. And so the point is, saying that Donald Trump doesn't have executive privilege here, that paved the way for the FBI being able to view the classified documents, right? So the National Archives are the ones who took the 15 boxes, all right? Trump gave them to them after going back and forth. And then the National Archives said, hey, there's classified documents here, they're stamped, and they went to the DOJ. So there had to be a discussion between the DOJ and Biden because only Biden had the ability to waive executive privilege there that would allow the FBI to have access to this, get the grand jury together, and so on and so forth, right?
That points the finger directly at Joe Biden, which again is what we've talked about in the past. I mean, to think that a guy like Merrick Garland, who is an unimpressive figure on the surface, would make a decision like this 90 days, approximately 90, 95 days prior to a midterm election that was going very south at that point. You know, Joe Manchin hadn't quite come out and said he was going to support the minor version of Build Back Better, otherwise known as the Inflation Enhancement Act. And literally, Biden was sitting there in the mid-30s in his polling. It was looking like an absolute disaster for Democrats. So what do? They go back to the old Russia collusion playbook and they think, okay, the only thing that can change the narrative, and they were right about this, is to get a bigger story. What's a bigger story than Donald Trump? He overshadows everything. You go around the country, which I've had the fortune of doing on this trip. I ask people, what do you think about this bill? They're like, what bill? What are you talking about? How's it going to change my life? No, it is so far below Donald Trump. So, I mean, give the Democrats and whoever hatched the idea, Ron Klain, Susan Rice, Biden didn't hatch this idea, but give them credit for executing it, because their plan to change the narrative, it actually has worked so far. So no, I clearly think it was an intentional situation. I think at the end of the day, Drew, when all the facts come out, as they like to say, going back to the Watergate days, if this thing truly does point to Joe Biden, as you and I suspect, and as Solomon's documents reference, this could be a catastrophic blow up for Biden. So, I mean, I think they're going to peak too soon. I think the news will gradually go in Trump's favor. And most of the American public, Drew, they want to say, two stats. 57% of Americans said they want the investigation to continue, but over 70% of Americans say, hey, what's the reason that this happened? And that's where I think we need to get to.
Yeah. And I think it's important to discuss, too, the other angle, which is what Kash Patel suggested very early on, that this raid was actually about getting documents that were incriminating to those involved in Trump-Russia collusion.
Right.
And this is something that I was thinking about, and I'll run this by you, Mark, all last night. Now, Kash has already said that's kind of what this is about. Mm-hmm. And I think we should compare this to what happened with Hillary Clinton for a second and her email scandals, because there are a lot of similarities, you could say, between what they're accusing Trump of and what Hillary Clinton actually did, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, Hillary Clinton clearly violated the law. There wasn't any question about it. But again, did they let it go? Of course they let it go. It was close to an election. You're not going to, in the big scheme of things, Democratic-controlled Washington, Hillary Clinton, she was favored to win. You remember the polling. Oh, there's a 95% chance she's going to win it, on and on and on. So they weren't going to do anything to disrupt that. But for her, she actually physically destroyed items that the FBI wanted her to keep. What happened to her? Nothing. No house raided. No, nothing. So that gives you an illustration of how completely unprecedented this is. I mean, never in American history has a man who's been out of office 18 months had his house raided. Now, I know some of these liberals go on CNN, MSNBC, and even the networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, et cetera, and they're saying, well, it was a legitimate, legally acceptable raid. Maybe so, dotting I's and crossing T's. But where do you get the common sense to say, hey, wait a minute now, we're in the middle of a political season. He's a former president. He may be running. I mean, and using the Hillary comparison, literally nothing happened to Hillary. And I'll take it a step further, Drew. Look at what happened to Trump associates. How was Roger Stone treated? Not very well. They come into his house in Fort Lauderdale with guns drawn at night, guys in his bed. Paul Manafort, Peter Navarro, who's been a guest on our show. I mean, these people were treated like common criminals. You didn't see, no Democrat gets treated that way. And that's what I think is the problem, Drew. It's the double standard. The Republicans are always guilty until proven innocent. The Democrats, there's nothing to see there. Let's move on.
Yeah. And what's shocking about this is, look, as we talk about Hillary Clinton, who violated two federal laws. I mean, one federal law, she had an illegal server. That was a violation. And then they keep talking about, the Presidential Records Act, right? He had things that he shouldn't have had. Well, she violated the Federal Records Act, which is the equivalent for, her being the Secretary of State and so on and so forth, right? But here's the difference between Clinton and Trump. Clinton, when she was under investigation, when they asked for her email, she destroyed the evidence.
Right.
Aides even destroyed two phones, Blackberries that she was using. Trump, he wasn't destroying evidence. He was trying to preserve some kind of evidence, which leads me to believe Kash Patel's theory. Because the basis of the Democrat accusations against Trump are his possession and mishandling of federal documents. They weren't concerned about that with Hillary Clinton. That's not really a threat. So what is this really about? Trump already handed over 15 boxes of requested documents to the National Archives. And then that was back in January. And then in June, the FBI visited his home and took additional documents. And then they asked him to padlock a door that was holding other documents. And then they issued a subpoena for those documents. So what this really points to me, Mark, is that all along they've been looking for something very specific and they've been unsatisfied with what they've been provided. They're not looking for classified documents. They're looking for something very specific because he keeps giving them things and they keep somehow knowing that there's something else there. Well, how do they know this? So this is what leads me to believe that this is what this is about. It goes back to 2016, Trump-Russia collusion, and all of that. So we will see, but this is not about mishandling of classified documents.
No. And some people said it's tied to the January 6th commission. That very well may be, but to tie anything to Russia, that is just bizarrely stupid. That's been debunked. Everybody knows it's debunked. Look, what they've done here, I think I read a headline on Real Clear Politics earlier today. They've got a suspect identified. Now they have to create a crime. I mean, that's how insane this stuff is. I mean, that was an appropriate headline. Give whoever writes the headlines at Real Clear Politics credit for that one. Again, they've got a suspect, so be it Donald Trump. Now we got to find a crime. What did he do here? I mean, look, there's some of the stuff that they deemed classified. I mean, his notes to Kim Jong-un. What the hell? Who cares? I mean, some of the stuff, and look, Trump took the position he declassified all of it. Okay, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But you and I both know some of the stuff in there is no more classified than putting a sheet of paper in front of Biden's face and saying, read it. I mean, this is literally taking it from step 0 to nuclear all in one batch. And I think the longer this goes on, again, Democrats are going to try to play it out longer. Trump has taken the right position. He wants everything disclosed. I think the fact that there's going to be a redaction here, and the judge has said, look, to the Justice Department, there's not enough here to keep this thing sealed. My question to you, Drew, is how much do you think they're going to redact? I mean, is it going to be 20%, 50%, 80%? And if it's a vast majority, isn't that going to leave the public just asking for more questions?
Yeah, it is. There's no way to resolve this unless they give us an unredacted, fully unredacted version. But they don't want to do that. Now they're going to sit here and crow and complain and cry and whine and say, oh, no, we can't do that. There's names at risk. There's all this. That's nonsense. That's a cover up, because of what they put the country through. All of that becomes very insignificant. It's more important that they reveal everything and put this to rest. But they're not going to do that because they're making this thing up as they go. And you said something very important, about them creating another crime. When I watched Merrick Garland finally, after 3 days of hiding, after that raid took place, come out and finally give a speech to the press, it was very short and brief. He claimed credit for it, and then he disappeared without taking questions. Right. It reminded me of a police chief that shows up after, some kind of horrific crime like a mass shooting and gives a press conference. They answer more questions than Garland did, but they don't answer many questions because it's an ongoing investigation. But the difference in that scenario, when you have a crime, is that a crime was actually committed. In Trump's case, Merrick Garland goes up there and doesn't answer any questions because they haven't even found a crime. They haven't decided a crime. That's how insane this is. And the American people have kind of, I think, this has become normalized for us. But you have somebody being persecuted, and they can't even tell you what he did wrong.
Yeah, I mean, does anyone really in their, forget whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent, would anyone in their right mind think that a former president would be charged with the Presidential Records Act? I mean, Drew, honestly, until it became public, I didn't even know there was an act called the Presidential Records Act. I mean, and you know, you and I are pretty close to this stuff. So no, this is a political hit job to the nth degree. And you know what happens in political hit jobs, Drew? And you see this all around the world. If you don't kill the guy, politically speaking, he comes back stronger. And my sense is that the American public, you know, albeit excluding the far left-wing radicals, when this document is finally made public, because it will eventually come out, I think people are going to look at this and say, you put Trump through that again? I mean, my sense is I don't think there's anything in this document. I don't think it ever should have been the case. Now, again, I don't know the facts. This is my opinion, and you and I are giving our opinions here. But I think this is actually worse than Russiagate. I think it's worse than the impeachment hearings because he's out of office. And why? Let's step back a second. Why are they doing this? Well, we talked about reason number one. They wanted to change the subject of the midterms. Now, what are they going to run on right now? Well, we're running on the Inflation Reduction Act. Nobody believes that. That is just insane. Are prices really coming down other than for gasoline? No, they're not. Rents keep going up. Food costs stay high. Hey, did anyone take a look yesterday at the border? We crossed 2 million people coming across the border. How about the crime in the blue cities? You know, did everybody see the clip of the guy in New York getting sucker punched by some guy that had just gotten out on bail? You know, it's happening all across. So if you're in a Biden administration and you've got a debacle on your hands and everybody in the Democratic Party knows they have a debacle, look what they did before. It's the same playbook. Well, what are we going to do? Well, we can't just run on the issue. Yeah, we're going to get Trump again. I mean, think about it, Drew. The Russia collusion hoax, and that's what it was. I mean, people actually went on cable networks talking about Trump peeing in bed with prostitutes. I mean, it was the most insane stuff. Then we go through an impeachment hearing, and then we have an impeachment hearing over a damn phone call. I mean, the Washington establishment, and I don't want to, we'll just call it the Washington establishment. And the only thing, Drew, I can think of is fear. Because if Trump runs, a lot of people are saying, on Trump's, he can't win. Well, we heard that story in 2016. Okay. And you and I have seen polling of matchups between Trump and Biden. Trump's generally ahead 3 or 4 points. Now, again, we're not putting any credibility into him. But my suspect, and I believe you're in this camp too, is I think this was a purely political hit job. I don't think Trump's done anything illegal here. And I think when the facts come out, look, the Democrats are going to say, he's guilty. Republicans are going to say, he didn't do anything wrong. And that 1/3 chunk of the electorate that vote, the independents, are going to look at this and say, we should be doing this for that? I think it's going to blow up in their face.
Yeah. It should. I mean, people continue to give this a pass, but this would be like Donald Trump once he was elected, revoking, Obama's executive privilege and sending in the FBI to raid his home, looking for documents related to, Fast and Furious or something like that. I mean, obviously that would be absolutely dangerous and unprecedented. But that didn't happen to him, nor should it have. But here it is happening to Trump. But to shift subjects here, still related to this, look, we've just talked about all these things that are really damning to the Democratic Party, right? I mean, we still got the inflation problem that you mentioned, the Inflation Enhancement Act. They're not even calling it an Inflation Reduction Act anymore. They're just calling it, essentially the Green New Deal. They're calling it what it was all along, and they deceived everyone. But, now they're trying to pump out this news story that Biden approval has popped back up. Yeah. A month ago, it was approval was 36%. Now, all of a sudden, they're telling us it's 47%. I don't buy this. Could this be possible?
No, it's absolutely not possible. I talked about this a little bit yesterday. Back in May, NBC, not exactly a conservative outfit, they had Biden's approval rating at 42%, his disapproval at 55%. That was in May. In August, and this is NBC News, folks, reasonable polling people, they had Biden the identical numbers, with the exception his disapproval had ticked up 1 point. 42% approval. The Reuters Ipsos poll that came out right after the Inflation Enhancement Act was passed, 40% approval. So Rasmussen, a very good pollster, 41, 42%. His approval rating, which was in the mid to upper 30s, pick your poll. If you average them Real Clear Politics, he did get down 38, 39%, lower than Trump ever was. And now I think legitimately he's sitting 41, 42, disapproval 56, 57. He's 15 to 16 points underwater, and it's not going to change between now and the election. They're not going to be able to affect people's lives. Remember what Ronald Reagan said, are you better now than you were 4 years ago? Well, people are looking at Biden as the symbol. And if the Republicans get their message out and will start talking about the items we just talked about, crime, the border, inflation, all you got to say to them, are you spending more money at the grocery store than you were when Biden was elected? Yes. Are you spending more on rent or mortgage payments? Yes. How's crime treated? Is there crime in your area? It's exploding everywhere across the country. How's that no bail law, get out of jail free card working? Not so good. Do you like seeing 2 million people come across the border? I mean, if we talk about the issues and the Republican candidates do, they'll have a very successful election. If we're sitting here talking about Mar-a-Lago, my opinion, I don't think as much. The Biden administration has nothing they can point to other than stuff that their far left-wing radical base wants to hear. And my sense is, yes, the media, think about it, Drew. The media knows Biden's upside down. The media also knows the Democrats are going to lose the House. We don't know by how much, but they're going to lose it. The Senate could go either way. So this is really directed at those Senate voters. And they're trying to make it sound like a radical, like the guy in Pennsylvania, who's to the far left of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. Yeah, he's going to represent candidates like that. So I believe this is all, again, what have I said? You and I talked about many times. The media is the propaganda arm of the Democratic Party. And I see Susan Rice or Ron Klain picked up the phone and said, hey, here's the new story. We're going to inflate Biden's numbers. We're going to get people to think it's going good. But you know what, Drew? I think he's at 42. And I think that's his ceiling. I don't think he goes higher.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, look, we've seen this before in 2016 when they were predicting 100% chance that Hillary Clinton was going to win. You have to understand, I mean, we know the media is totally disingenuous, but they play these mental games too because they want to suppress our vote, right? So they want to kind of demoralize us. And what bothers me the most is, it's important to say that we can't take anything for granted. We have to go out and vote like our lives depend upon it, because they do in November. But that said, there's no talk about this red wave anymore. And what bothers me is two things. You have Liz Cheney, who says she's going to campaign for Democrats. Campaign for Democrats in races where any Republican dares question the 2020 election results. And then you have Mitch McConnell, who Trump just called a broken down hack because he's expressing concerns over GOP candidate quality. And McConnell, in my opinion, you can address Liz and McConnell, whatever order you want here. But to me, you know, at the best case scenario for McConnell here, he's proven once again that he's not a leader. But I think the worst case scenario and more likely scenario is that he represents that old establishment we talk about, where there was no difference between the Republicans and Democrats, in which they just played a game in Washington, D.C., and the Republicans pretended to be outraged so they could get fundraising and get in power. But neither party wanted to actually solve anything, because then they'd lose their mechanism for running for reelection. McConnell seems to be interested in sabotaging the Republicans in November. He's like a head coach of a team that's going out and telling everyone, well, next Sunday we're going to lose the football game because, my team, my players, they're just, they're not quite up to it. We lack quality candidates on this football team. I mean, it's insane.
Well, I'm going to push back on a little bit with you there. Now, I have the benefit of being in the great state of Kentucky in my hometown of Louisville right now. I've known Mitch McConnell for 30 years. So he did sort of walk those comments back in a comment yesterday. And he did say, it could go either way. It's a 50-50 Senate. He walked back the sort of the candidate piece. But most importantly, and I want all our listeners and viewers to remember this, McConnell controls what's called the Senate Leadership Fund. That's the money arm of the Republican Party in the Senate. Well, he just sent a boatload of money to Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania, J.D. Vance in Ohio, and our candidates in Arizona and Nevada. In Nevada, we're actually leading by a couple points. So I didn't like McConnell's comment. I'm perfectly straight here about, candidates matter. We all know candidates matter, okay? I go back to the Ronald Reagan statement, never speak ill about a fellow Republican. And that, if it was good enough for Ronald Reagan, it's good enough for me, and I've adhered to that philosophy. And for the life of me, I'm going to get to Cheney in just a second. I think, and I don't know if you caught the article Newt Gingrich wrote and a video I saw from Dick Morris, two people I respect a lot. Both of them have the opinion that this is more media propaganda. You and I both know that in a lot of polling at the state level, more of the rural voters do not get polled. And believe me, they will come out to vote. So while I saw the initial polling that showed, pretty big lead in Pennsylvania for the Democrat, decent side lead for Raphael Warnock over Herschel Walker, and pretty much a tie in Ohio between Tim Ryan and J.D. Vance. But following that, the polling that came out from Robert Cahaley's group, Trafalgar, it showed Oz only down 5 in Pennsylvania. It showed Herschel Walker down 2 in Georgia. It showed the race in Ohio tied. It showed Adam Laxalt up by 2 points in Nevada. So I think that by the time the money machine gets cranked out, and that money is starting to pour into some of these races now, I think, and again, I hate saying this, but it does influence people, that when the advertising dollars come out and people realize, hey, wait a second, this knucklehead in Pennsylvania is going to vote to curb energy. Well, energy is a huge business in Pennsylvania, okay? And I think when you take it down to local levels, and the emphasis is going to be these Democrats, and this is something, Drew, our party can learn from them. Do you ever see a vote that takes place where Democrats are not lock, stock, and barrel all voting for the same thing? Not me. I mean, almost every critical issue, other than one time when Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema fought back that monstrosity, Build Back Better, they pretty much get on the same page on everything. So when these people like Ryan in Ohio campaign as, I'm a moderate Democrat. No, there is no such thing as a moderate Democrat. They're all Schumer Democrats and Biden Democrats. The other thing McConnell said yesterday was that he said, we'll take back the House, and if the Senate, which is 50-50 now, if we can put our resources into it and take that, then Joe Biden will become a moderate president. And I believe McConnell on that. One thing, and a lot of people, they view McConnell as the Washington establishment, but I got to tell this in support of McConnell. He shepherded 3 Supreme Court justices through for Donald Trump. And back when that was happening, when you're doing good things for Trump, you're his best friend. When you say bad things about him, you're not. But when it really came time to count the cards, McConnell did not vote to impeach him on those sham impeachment trials. He got 3 people through the Senate. When we're in the minority now, prior to this last bill passing, McConnell's done a good job as the minority leader. And when he was majority leader, we did pick up a lot of seats. So I think that our party, the Republican Party, which is on the right side of the issues, now that these primaries are behind us, we have to have the party unified. We can't have a situation like happened in Connecticut where Leora Levy wins the race and that her Republican opponent says she's not going to support her. And now let me take a minute or two and I'll turn it back to on Liz Cheney. What a debacle. Okay. Her father, who I really liked as vice president. I mean, Cheney did a good job as VP because the Democrats, they loathed him about as much as they loathe Trump right now. I mean, literally, most of the Democrats thought Cheney was the president. Remember when those comments would come out? So for Liz Cheney to make a statement like she made, frankly, I think her influence within the party is nominal at best. Okay. And whether she campaigns against Republicans or not, I don't think it's going to matter. Because you think about this, okay, in her home state of Wyoming, which is arguably among the most conservative states, when she ran for election last time, she got what, 71, 72% of the vote. And now she was down in what, the 20s? I mean, I think her influence is going to be negligible. So I don't even think she's going to be a factor. But what I do think is important is for, like we're seeing in Pennsylvania, that I can't remember the man who lost to Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania, very sharp, very smart guy. He said, I support Oz and I support him 100%. That's what we need to have as a party where we come together because boy, the Democrats, they sure will be.
Yep. They're lockstep all the time, as you just brilliantly pointed out. And you're right. I think it's kind of funny. I mean, Liz Cheney's just as delusional as the Democrats, right? I mean, she thinks she's some person of influence, but she was just resoundingly rejected, just like 8 of the 10 other congressional Republicans who were fired, who voted to impeach Donald Trump. So yeah, her time's over, and she's just desperate for love from the only place she can get it, and that's the Democratic Party. There's news out that Fauci's planning on retiring in December, right? That's what he's said. We'll see what happens. And Republicans are saying that it's because he wants to escape investigation, prosecution. Rand Paul's come out and said, hey, we'll get him either way. It doesn't matter if he runs. But what do you make of the Fauci situation? Are you relieved to see him go?
I am relieved to see him go. He was a polarizing figure. Again, he led the country, was the chief medical officer of the country, going through so many bad policies. I mean, so many things that they recommended proved not to be true. Now, do I think the guy had motives? He probably, I don't know. I'm not going to get inside his head, but everything from the Wuhan lab, the lab leak theory, to the mask, the mandates, the mask in school, the vaccinations. I mean, the track record of Dr. Fauci through this pandemic is not exactly a stellar record. And that's through 2 presidents, from both Donald Trump, and through Joe Biden. So do I think he's retiring to avoid investigations? I doubt it. The guy's been there 40 years. Okay, the pandemic is waning. I don't know. I mean, I'm sort of the camp, he was actually, believe it or not, folks, the highest paid government employee. He is number one of every government employee. He's number one. So, from my point of view, let him go.
Well, I just hope that after all his years of wonderful service to this country, leading the charge to lock down the country that put people out of work and destroyed our cities and our livelihoods, I just hope that, with his $350,000 a year pension that we pay him in retirement, that he's going to be okay. I just sincerely hope he's okay. That's enough money for him to survive.
Well, plus the royalties he gets from the Chinese, of course.
That's right. But I mean, I do think that's amazing that this is somebody who's going to get paid roughly $350,000 a year by the taxpayer. And he was instrumental in pushing the mandates and those lockdowns and so on and so forth that really wrecked our economy. So he destroyed so many lives and the livelihood of so many Americans. He's going to walk away into the sunset with $350,000 a year, courtesy of you and me and everyone listening and watching right now.
Welcome to the swamp. That's sort of how it works. I mean, think about this. I mean, all those kids that had to go through the stuff with the schools and these, look, it's one thing on the vaccinations as a whole separate subject, but the mask stuff, I mean, it just, he became the symbol, I think, of just how, government tries to do things right. And again, I'm not singling out Republicans, Trump or Biden. I mean, Fauci's been through both of them. He tends to do whatever Biden tells him to do. Okay, so fine on that front, but it's just, it's time to see him go. And him and Rand Paul, I don't think they're going to be like social buddies together. I mean, those two have had some legendary battles. But at the end of the day, I look back at this and say, governors like Brian Kemp in Georgia and Ron DeSantis in Florida, they were right. Unlike some of these blue state governors who basically worshiped at Fauci's altar. So, I'm in the opinion, okay, let's get some new blood in there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, would you support? I mean, I think there's so many unanswered questions about so many scandals out there. Fauci arguably, and I think he absolutely did. He did perjure himself in congressional testimony about gain of function research. And I think Fauci represents for a lot of Americans, just like Hillary Clinton, just like the people behind Trump-Russia collusion, the Democrats get away with this every time. They never face any consequences. And I mean, the Republicans are promising to go after people like Fauci and investigate them at a minimum.
I think that's appropriate.
Should they?
Oh, listen, everything that has not been legitimately investigated by Democrats, they're not going to investigate themselves, folks. But when Kevin, it just doesn't work that way. When Kevin McCarthy becomes Speaker, and we will take back the House, all of these actions that are deemed questionable or inappropriate under a Democratic administration, they need to be taken a close look at. Now, we don't know what we're going to find, but McCarthy has promised that they're going to look into these things, and rightfully so. And whether Fauci's retired or not, he still is going to have to come and testify if there are investigations going on. So no, I'm not looking to give him, just sweep it under the rug. I'm saying Republicans should let the facts take them where they need to go. And if it's deemed to be that something impropriety has been done, or he gave false and misleading testimony, then let him deal with that accordingly.
Yeah, amen. So I mean, let's close out here with this. I've got some questions for you about Mike Pence here. I won't give my opinion off the bat. I'll leave it to you. He obviously wants to be president. He wants to run for president in 2024. He's jockeying to put himself in position, but recently, he seems to be out of touch with, the Trump base, right? Those that he would need to support him. And amidst this FBI raid, he is going along, it seems, with the left's narrative, right? They don't want us talking about the FBI corruption. And in an effort to silence us, they're saying that we're stoking attacks by by speaking badly about them. So he called on recently verbal attacks against the FBI to stop, right? He wants us to censor ourselves. What do you make of this?
I think Mike Pence is looking for a lane for himself. I do believe he's going to run against the president. Assuming President Trump decides to run. I think Mike Pence has a certain part of the Republican Party. Look, none of the Trump supporters are going to vote for Mike Pence. I mean, that's oil and water. So if President Trump runs, he's going to take an enormous segment of the voters away. But Mike Pence does occupy a certain segment of the party, the more conservative wing. Pence is an outspoken proponent of right to life. He is from right across the river in southern Indiana. And prior to January 6th, if you look back on Mike Pence's career, well-respected congressman, well-respected governor of Indiana, arguably did a nice job as Trump's vice president. Okay, so Mike Pence is a consummate, I'll say a conservative. The problem, I think, with Mike Pence is if other people get in the race, like a Mike Pompeo, like a Ron DeSantis, like a Tom Cotton, possibly Tim Scott. Again, I've said before, whether President Trump runs or not, I think we're going to have a robust field of candidates. Mike Pence's lane, if you will, to borrow the Washington, D.C. parlance, it's a narrow lane. And I just don't think, I don't know that he has there's enough Republican support for the Mike Pences of the world. So I think his path is pretty narrow. But again, is Mike Pence a good Republican? You're damn right he's a good Republican, and any Republican is better than any Democrat. So that's my thoughts on Mike Pence.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. When I look at the situation with Mike Pence, and I obviously I don't know him personally, and all the things you said are true. He has been a consummate conservative, a well-liked person, and I've admired him for his faith as a Christian myself. But I just see him as the wrong person at the wrong time. He's incapable of meeting the challenges that we're facing. Because he's stuck in another time. He doesn't seem capable of addressing the seriousness of it. This isn't America in the 60s or 70s or 80s. This is 2022. And, it's like, we needed Lincoln when we had Lincoln, and Pence is not Lincoln. I mean, for him to sit here, and I understand what he's doing. He's trying to, like you said, find a lane for himself, which is, I'm the good guy, I'm measured, I'm reasonable. But that's not where we are. We don't live in reasonable times. I mean, you have the FBI being weaponized to go after a former president of the United States, and it's not the first time they've done it. And he wants to call on us to be careful about our verbal attacks. I don't like this kind of moral authority and high ground he's claiming for himself, when he should be making different statements, even if he wants to kind of play, future president where he's trying to unite the country. Why doesn't he call on these so-called good guys in the FBI to come forward and fight for their agency? Don't tell me to stop verbally attacking the FBI. Those people in the FBI that are doing this are responsible for their destroyed reputation. It is up to the quote unquote good guys. Where are they? I mean, they apparently a few are coming forward and talking about the FBI, but that's my issue with Mike Pence. Wrong person, wrong time, to save this country.
Let me give you a little contrast here. Okay. Let's say, for example, let's put Trump aside for just a minute. If Trump decided not to run, most Trump supporters are going to be perfectly happy, I believe, with a list of the following: a Ron DeSantis. Polls have already shown us that. Tom Cotton, if he decides to run, a Mike Pompeo, who was a Trump loyalist, and Mike Pompeo's had every job in the world in government and it's done really well. Top guy in his class, graduated Harvard Law, top in his class, CIA director, Secretary of State, you name it. Okay, so I think the Trump base, and they may react favorably more, but those three candidates in particular, the Trump base would be perfectly happy with them. But the Trump base is not going to support Mike Pence. So I really believe, and if President Trump runs, I'm not certain whether DeSantis, Cotton, Pompeo, I'm not sure whether they will or not. Well, that we'll have to see how it all plays out. But I do think, on your point there, I'll give you another name: the Nikki Haley's of the world. I can't get in that lane. And maybe I'm prejudicing myself here because I really like the people I talked about. I really like Tom Cotton. I really like Mike Pompeo, and I really like Ron DeSantis. So I think there's going to be some room there, but I'm not. The others, I'm not so excited about. And I think we have to have a fighter to win, because we can say what we want about Biden, okay, but whoever that Democrat opponent's going to be, it's going to be a fight, and we got to have a fighter.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's close out with this one. Okay, so Brian Stelter's out at CNN. What do we make of that? Are they moving to the center as people are hoping, or are they just gonna fill the slots with more effective propagandists who aren't laughingstocks like Brian Stelter?
Yeah, Brian Stelter was the worst of the worst. I mean, he was wrong on virtually everything. Yeah, I think the new owners of CNN, with John Malone in particular, he's brought in a guy who it will clean house. Now, I think, will they go back to how it was when when CNN used to be a news network where you could actually turn to CNN when the really news was happening? Folks, you got to go back to the early 2000s for that. That's how bad they've gone. So I think the management is going to clean up CNN. I think guys like Don Lemon are on a short leash. And I think Stelter was just the first. And I hope for the good of the country that they can turn CNN back to a news network that it used to be, because at one point, and a lot of people may not realize this, CNN was a respected name in news, but it became so political with the former management. So I'm an optimist, and I think with that new management, people may be surprised. Stelter's not going to be the first head to roll. He was just the most obvious because the caricature of him being wrong about everything. And I'm going to go back. Drew, you remember? You may not remember, but I'm sure you've seen the news releases. There was a guy in Baghdad when Saddam Hussein was going down. They called him Baghdad Bob. Literally, the bombs were going off in Baghdad. And he said, "Oh, no, we're doing great. Everything's fine outside." That's the type of guy Stelter was. So, no, I'm optimistic, to be honest with you.
That's great. Well, what's a preview? What do you got on the agenda tomorrow for tomorrow's show?
Andrew Krapushides, a Red Balloon, staunch conservative out of Moscow, Idaho. He's going to be hosting the show tomorrow. What the job he's doing with bringing conservatives, fighting back against all this wokeness and hiring. Great guy. He's been on the show many times, and I think he'll be an entertaining show tomorrow.
Yeah. He's a consummate pro, and he's a fighter, and he's a very, very level-headed, but no nonsense guy. So that's exciting.
Yeah.
All right. Well, any final thoughts here?
Yeah, my final thoughts are I really enjoyed having you host my show today. I tell you what, well, I always say I really enjoy doing the show with you, and I really enjoyed it with you being the host today. Folks that watch and listen to our show, Drew is the best. I always loved getting into the conversations with you, and I know our audience appreciates it. Thank you for hosting today.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure. It's been interesting for the mind here with Mark Schaftlein on the Mark Schaftlein Report. But hopefully everyone enjoyed. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, Drew. Thank you very much.